in the beginning, there was a madman. Adolf Hitler's Third Reich ruled the continent of Europe. Powerful, arrogant, murderous. But in the end, it all came crashing down. As the Soviets closed in on the Führer bunker in Berlin, Hitler shot himself. His mistress, Eva Braun, took poison. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels first poisoned his 6 children, then he and his wife poisoned themselves. But what of the others who served Hitler and his murderous regime? Some were brought to trial at Nuremberg and elsewhere. But not all. Many of them just disappeared. As it turns out, it was a disappearance well planned. Argentina, South America. It was a country off the beaten path in the mid-1940s with its own burgeoning Nazi movement. And with a former army colonel named Juan Perón in charge, a country ready to play a pivotal role in providing a safe haven for the Nazis. How many?
We do not know the size of the problem.
Are we talking hundreds? Are we talking thousands?
I'm afraid that maybe in the thousands.
Last December, Argentine Foreign Minister Guido de Tella took a giant step toward exposing the truth when he signed this decree, opening the secret files of government agencies, including the federal police and the foreign ministry. Now, after all these years, the world can finally see what Argentina did.
Visas were handed out just wholesale with no questions asked.
There was a bit of that, yes.
So the government knew that it was giving visas, allowing Nazi war criminals to come to Argentina.
Some people in government certainly did.
These are the archives of Argentine immigration. Everyone who registered into the country is listed here. After the war, when the Nazis began flooding in, some were so bold as to use their own names. Here's an entry from June of 1948. Schroeder, Erich Emil, says he was an engineer. Erich Schroeder was the Gestapo chief of Portugal. Some, of course, didn't use their own names. Here's an entry from July of 1950. Clement Ricardo says he was a technician. That's Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi who supervised the extermination of the Jews. And this one from June of 1949, at the very bottom of the page, here's the name Gregor Helmut, who says he was a mechanic. Who was this mechanic? Let's see.
Gregor lived in various Buenos Aires suburbs. For a time, he had a jungle hideaway nearby. But as the newly opened federal police records show, he felt safe enough after a few years to re-register under his real name, Jose Mengele, Dr. Joseph Mengele. He was no mechanic. At Auschwitz, they called him the Angel of Death. He helped select those who would live and die. He tortured and murdered children, particularly twins, with his medical experiments. Mengele is believed to have died in 1979 in Brazil. But we now have proof for the first time that the Argentine authorities knew about his activities in their country and protected him.
There you can see his activities here in the country, how he lived with such impunity.
When the archives were opened, Dr. Beatrice Gurevich, research director for Jewish organizations in Buenos Aires, set to work gathering data on Nazi war criminals like Mengele.
This is a document from the federal police.
Those are Mengele's fingerprints?
These are Mengele's fingerprints.
They had him on file?
Yes, of course. And the argument for not extraditing him was that Argentina didn't extradite people for political crimes.
Mengele? Political crimes?
So it is said in the document.
Well, Dr. Mengele was one of the great butchers of all times.
That was the argument. Why are you so astonished about this? This is absence of moral responsibility.
But this absence of moral responsibility was not Argentina's alone. Nazi war criminals needed help to escape Europe. They got it here in Rome, beginning with two highly unlikely sources, the intelligence services of Britain and the United States.
They saved tens of thousands of Nazis in order to use them against the Soviets.
Peter Tompkins should know. He was a wartime spy working undercover in Rome for the American OSS, predecessor of the CIA.
Are you telling me that the OSS helped Nazis escape justice at the end of the war?
Oh, absolutely. They created a clandestine army of ex-Nazis using people like Klaus Barbie, for instance, who said, oh, that's a good Nazi, that's a good Nazi, I know him, I know him, I know him.
But if it sounds incredible that the U.S. would use Klaus Barbie, later convicted in France as the Butcher of Lyon, because he and his fellow Nazis were thought to possess experience that could help against the Soviets, consider who else played a major role in the Nazis' escape route. None other than the Vatican.
The Vatican then had an entire system of monasteries and convents. We called it the rat line. That was the American code word for the operation.
The rat line.
The rat line.
John Loftus is a former Nazi hunter for the U.S. Justice Department who spent years investigating this elaborate escape route known as the rat line. He says Pope Pius XII was pro-German because he saw the Nazis as a bulwark against the communists, whose ideology the Pope viewed as a mortal threat to the Church. So beginning in 1945, the Pope allowed one of his bishops to produce phony ID for fugitive Nazis. Bishop Alois Hudal, with the blessing of some British and U.S. government officials, set up shop in this nondescript rectory just outside the Vatican.
My estimate is that we sent some 60,000 fugitive Nazi war criminals to Argentina after World War II, during a 5-year period.
But from his vantage point overlooking St. Peter's Basilica, the historian who studied that period for the Vatican, Father Robert Graham, says it was simple refugees being helped, not Nazis. Though
One or two may have slipped through, of course.
One or two?
Yes. There was no...
Father, there were thousands.
Oh, please. No, don't kid me. Don't be ridiculous. Thousands. That's absurd.
to the extent that Bishop Hudal was helping fugitive Nazis, Father Graham insists the bishop was operating totally on his own.
He didn't speak for the Vatican.
He was a counselor in the Holy Office.
Oh, please. That doesn't mean anything from the point of what we're talking about here.
He was a friend of the Pope's.
Please. Are you all so simple and unsophisticated as to believe that's not? Please, be more intelligent than that. Give the Pope some credit.
Did Pope Pius know what was going on?
Oh, of course. But Pius, you must remember, Pius XII was scared to death of communists.
Whatever Pius's role, it is, however, indisputable that the fugitive Nazi hordes came down these narrow streets looking for Bishop Hudal and his assistant, a mysterious former Nazi army lieutenant named Reinhard Kops.
Reinhard Kopp's job was to come up with identity documents. He needed 3 pieces of paper to get a Nazi war criminal smuggled out of Italy. One was a Red Cross passport, and the Vatican took care of that. The second was the Argentine visa, and Perón took care of that. And the third was an identity paper. Kops handed those out to the fugitive Nazis, so if they were arrested in Rome, they could say, well, I'm living at this monastery.
I had no question in my mind that he had participated in the rat line, getting other Nazis out of Europe.
Rick Eaton of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which works hard to hunt down Nazi war criminals, had a tip that Kops went down the rat line himself to Argentina. Posing as a neo-Nazi, Eaton found a man who called himself Juan Mahler, a writer of pro-Nazi books, with a story that sounded like Kops.
He said he had an office in the Vatican, and it was his job to get people papers.
Could Juan Mahler be Reinhard Kops in hiding? We went to the Argentine Andes, to a town named Bariloche, where we found the man who helped run the rat line, a 79-year-old ex-Nazi named, well, named what?